going. And so everyone, I'm sure, has been on Zoom off and on last year, but just as a quick reminder, if you would like to see just the speaker, there's a toggle at the top right-hand side of your screen that changes the view from gallery to speaker view. So you can either see everybody on the screen or you can just see the speaker. You can also change your name if it's not already listed by clicking, hovering over your own video image, and there's a little 3 dots on the right-hand side that you can click on, and you can rename. So I'm going to actually do that for myself right now, show you how that changes. And I would like to just assure you that while we would love to see your face, you don't have to show your face. We would like you to participate in the dialogues when we go into the breakout rooms, if you can. The more interactive, the better. And the recording itself actually only records this main space. It doesn't record the conversations in the breakout rooms. So you have a little bit more maybe comfort for things you might want to say, but also be cognizant and respectful of everyone in the room and the conversations at hand. So let's see the other things. The buttons on the bottom left, you can mute yourself or turn your video on and off. There's a chat button where you can add your comments, and we'll ask you to use that for questions as well. And I'll give you a little bit more instruction on the breakout rooms when we get to that point, but we will be using those after the main presentations. So I guess that's probably all. David, I'll let you take back over.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Just to give a quick recap, I think everyone has seen the agenda. It was with the invitation to the session, but I'm going to give a couple of opening remarks now, sort of my thoughts at least on stage setting, and then we have 3 speakers that I think you have each received a copy of what we're calling the case study, which is just a little bit of a stage setting for the breakout groups. The presenters are not particularly speaking to the details of the case study, but our thought is that each of our presenters sort of will bring some perspective into this that we hope will be helpful to draw on in the discussions of the case study. So in a couple of minutes, I will introduce our presenters. But in the meantime, I just wanted to give a little bit of I'll say my perspective on the issue that we're talking about on the topic. What I am hoping that this is part of an ongoing discussion that we can have on is the issue of not sort of how do we find solutions to specific conflicts, to specific situations where there's disagreement on what should happen, but it's more how do we find ways to have those discussions peacefully and constructively. This is my little montage of different examples of where it's gone wrong, and I added in the middle. I used this a couple of years ago, and I have a new picture this year, which is January 6th in the Capitol building in Washington, which I think is probably one of the highlights of an issue of people feeling disconnected from a process and feeling that their solution to it was violence. More broadly, I look at it that conflict, we have conflicts all the time. The conflict, this is a dictionary definition, a serious disagreement or an argument, even a protracted one, an incompatibility between 2 or more opinions, principles, or interests. Conflicts happen all the time. Violence and harm is when that turns into either physical force that is harmful to others, or it can also manifest itself in, sorry, I had another slide. It can manifest itself, sort of social shunning, economic harm if people lose their jobs. There are a number of different kinds of harm that don't necessarily have to come when views conflict. And to me, that's the discussion that I hope we can explore today. There are a couple of models of how to think about this. One that I came across, I'll say I'm not deeply researched in this, but as a model of conflict escalation is if you go from left to right on the top, sort of going from tension to debate to actions to moving through threats and strategy, sort of strategies to intimidate. It goes as far as sort of total annihilation, but that's the progression that I hope we can talk about how we keep conflict away from. And then on the bottom are some thoughts on going from right to left. What are the things that pull us back from that? In terms of, at the early stages, sort of mediation and sort of moving down, you get into arbitration and court, and what are the various mechanisms we have to try and pull back from that? And just, again, we have tried to work a little bit into the case study, and I hope we can, we can discuss in the breakouts. There are a lot of different players that get involved in situations, particularly in mining and communities, that are sort of actors in this context. And in terms of the actions of those groups, the actions that we each have, in a sense, the CDA Collaborative has an interesting construct of there are 6 lessons of do no harm, and I think the first one is one to really think about, and think about how we bring into the case study discussions is, sort of any intervention becomes part of the context. And they also talk about contexts of dividers and connectors, and I actually have to look up now and remind myself on this, but dividers are things or factors that increase tension. And connectors are things or factors that reduce tension. And so it's how do we be very conscious of what are those dividers and connectors. And so they, I think, just have a good holistic framing of what we might think about in this situation. And with that's the shortest version that I have of my thoughts on that, but hopefully that gives some material for people to draw on. And with that, we now have 3 speakers who are far more expert in what they're going to speak to than my self-researched work in this area. But we have Aviva Silbert, who is a PhD candidate at the Belzili School of International Affairs, and her PhD work has been in this area. And so Aviva is going to talk a little bit on what she has found through her research work. We then have Anne-Marie Leclerc, who is with the Canadian government in the responsible businesses practice area. And she is going to speak a little bit from a government of Canada viewpoint on the role of business in this. And then we have Michael Mccullough, who is with the government of Canada in the human rights area. And I think we'll give sort of a little bit of a broader context of how the Canadian government looks at defending. And I think, Michael, I'm right that your area is specifically human rights defenders, or one of the areas that you're going to speak to. And I think many of the actors that we engage with, in one sense or other, are human rights defenders because they are defending rights within communities. And so I think it's a very useful context for us to think about in this. And so just to make sure I have covered everything, we will come to the breakout. We have, and I'm going to forget because I've lost the list of names. We have Lindsay Napier and Jocelyn Fraser and Amiel Blackman. I may have mispronounced that. Who are going to be our facilitators, as well as Aviva has volunteered. So when we get to that point, we have some individuals who have volunteered to facilitate the breakouts. But what I will do at this point is turn over to Aviva if you want to go through your material. And if we have time within the allotment for each speaker, we can do a few questions at the end if people want to raise their hand in the Zoom platform. Karen will facilitate that. So can I turn over to you, Aviva?
Yes. Okay, I'm sharing my screen now. Can everybody see it?
Yep.
Perfect. And as well, you can access, sorry, I need to how do I get to the chat here? Here we go. I've made the presentation as well as a short brief of what my key arguments available on my website. So I've put the link in the chat so you can access those so that you can focus your attention on me and rather than having to take notes and to help you to remember this material afterwards. So as David mentioned, I'm Aviva. I'm a PhD candidate with the University of Waterloo, and my research examines the complexity of mining-related conflicts, which focused in Guatemala. And we're all here today because these conflicts are an ongoing challenge. And for me, there are three interrelated challenges with these conflicts. The first challenge, which I spoke about at an earlier workshop in December, is that mining conflicts often involve issues that go beyond mining. Absolutely, there are substantive issues linked to mining operations, which may trigger these conflicts. But the reason why they might escalate into a conflict may often have to do with pre-existing issues in the society. Not only is it a challenge to grasp all of the different issues that are involved in a conflict, the efforts to address all of those different issues involved may go beyond the responsibility or competence of any one organization, like a mine, and may involve the efforts of many other organizations, which makes it complicated. A second challenge is that mining conflicts often involve a number of other organizations beyond just the company or the community or the local government. For example, civil society organizations are involved in supporting communities to raise awareness about their concerns or to help them to submit a complaint to a grievance mechanism. As well, there might be diplomatic interventions on behalf of a company. And while this involvement in many ways is helpful, it also complicates the situation by introducing more positions and interests into the situation. As well, it opens up the dynamic to the potential for forum shopping or other accountability issues. And the third challenge is that there are a lot of existing frameworks, mechanisms, and forums to address specific issues to do with mine operations like security, human rights, transparency, the environment. But there's no one mechanism or forum that can encompass all of the issues in one. And there is no mechanism or forum that can handle and receive the conflict as a whole. A final point to kind of bring all of this together is that how conflicts are handled initially matters a great deal to how they evolve over time. And the inability to constructively deal with all aspects of a conflict can make the original issues aggravated and escalate the conflict. And so having the proper tools to understand and take the necessary actions to address all of these aspects from the beginning are important. So in this presentation, I will unpack some of that complexity to help facilitate our conversation and about concrete actions that we can take within our respective areas to resolve and mitigate mining-related conflicts. And my insights are based on research that I did in Guatemala on the Marlin mine and Cerro Blanco mine, using a complex systems approach. So I'll begin by explaining really quickly what does that mean, and then I'll go into the three challenges that I mentioned by drawing on some examples from my research in Guatemala. So I think about a mine context as a complex system, meaning that they're all comprised of different organizations, who all have different perspectives, values, interests, and they all undertake different actions, which are shaped by the rules of society as well as other norms. And they all rely on resources and can interact with the environment. And collectively, all of these different components collectively generate an overall dynamic of the system. And in this case, I'm interested in seeing the dynamic of conflict. And so to understand a conflict, I identify what are all of these different components involved, how are they all connected, and how are they all collectively contributing to the dynamic of conflict. Looking at conflict in this way is helpful, in my opinion, because it helps to move focus away from placing blame on any one organization, because looking at it from this way makes it clear that there is a bunch of people and a bunch of things that are involved in a conflict situation. And it's also helpful to identify opportunities for action to help transform the situation. In my research in Guatemala, the two conflicts at the two mine sites involved substantive issues linked directly to mining, such as environmental damage, access to water, indigenous rights, and governance issues, as well as derivative issues like community divisions concerning the mine. But all of these issues stemmed from pre-existing issues in the society related to inequality and exclusion. And in Guatemala, these were legacy issues stemming from the Civil War so Guatemala had a civil war from 1960 to 1996. And these were all of the main issues involved in that conflict. And so by mapping who's talking to who, what are their perspectives, what actions are they doing, what resources do they rely on, I was able to objectively map this segregation in society and see how it affects all facets of life in the society, and see as well how it coincided with major socioeconomic inequalities, ideological divisions, and unequal influence in the government. As well, I was able to map how all of that has translated into major deficiencies in the rules and the enforcement of those rules. Basically, it resulted in the entire suite, the entire framework and structure of the economy was oriented towards the influence of elites and not serving the needs and interests of a large segment of the population. And this is a general problem in Guatemala, but it became relevant in the context of mining because the rules are not very stringent, they're not enforced properly, and the community does not have a lot of trust in the government to be able to properly oversee mine operations. They didn't feel that the mines are benefiting them, and those who were benefiting were already the ones that were well off and in positions of power, either locally or nationally. So in both mine contexts, the conflicts were just as much about these bigger issues as they were about substantive issues related to mining, like contamination or respect for indigenous rights. But it's challenging because when it's clear from these conflicts that there's an issue involved in the community's relationship with the government, and it's hard. So how does a mine approach that issue as part of addressing the immediate concerns towards the mine? In addition, using a complex systems approach helped me to identify a number of other social, environmental, economic, and governance related issues in the society. Again, these issues are totally separate from mining, but they became relevant to the context of mining because they either served as factors that shaped the way that the mine impacted the society, or they formed part of the community's overall experience of having the mine present. And so in this diagram here, the purple arrows are showing pre-existing issues that have nothing to do with the mine. And so the one purple arrow going to the mine is showing that, well, what the rules are shapes how the mine operates. But these red arrows are showing how, even though these issues are separate, and so an example of an environmental issue would be water scarcity and deforestation. And even though those aren't issues caused by mining, the presence of the mine and its use of water may exacerbate those issues. And in addition to having the mine shape those other issues, there are also ripple effects. So when these pre-existing environmental issues are exacerbated by the mine, it creates other challenges. For example, for the communities that are relying on that for their livelihoods. And so again, even though the mine doesn't directly cost them, it ends up all becoming wound up with the association with the mine and become part of the conflict. So the second challenge that I mentioned is that these conflicts have become globalized and have come to involve a number of other organizations beyond the mine, the community, or the government. And a global network of organizations support local communities to raise awareness about their concerns. It's helpful because it helps to channel their grievances and help respond to them through institutionalized channels, which avoids violence. But the involvement of the organizations has also shaped the narrative in ways that might leave out important issues within the local context and in the conflict dynamic. And what I found in Guatemala is that once I got there and was talking to the local community, there were so many other issues and concerns within the community, but those were not necessarily being taken up by NGOs necessarily. And it's not to blame NGOs, but it's just a result of the fact that an environmental NGO may take up the environmental aspects of the issue, and a human rights NGO might take up the human rights. But does it end up responding to all relevant dimensions of the conflict in the community? As well, the companies will also be seeking out support from others in the conflict, for example, by lobbying the host government, so Guatemala, or the home government, Canada, to give them help and support. But by involving so many more organizations, it just adds more interests and more players within the conflict. And so the third and final element is that there's a global array of forums and mechanisms that are available for resolving issues that might arise. And it's helpful, again, by providing nonviolent ways of airing grievances and helping to address company operations proactively, but they cannot necessarily address the full spectrum of issues. So the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, those can help companies respect human rights, and it provides for grievance mechanisms to respond to that. But if it doesn't have to do with human rights, it's not necessarily within the mandate or the scope of that set of tools and mechanisms to respond. And so the fact that a community might think that something's unfair might not necessarily be a human rights abuse. And so this is a challenge in having the right tools and forums to be able to fully respond to all aspects of the conflict. What I saw in Guatemala is that the communities have tried going to various mechanisms to try to address grievances that they had against the company. And this consumed a lot of time, effort, and resources, and didn't end up getting results in the way of resolving the conflict. It just ended up focusing their attention on the facts of whether or not the company was responsible for contamination in the community rather than focusing on, okay, there is contamination, how do we go about fixing that? And I saw that that was not very conducive for resolving the conflict as a whole. So in the two minds, I distinguished that there were multiple dynamics of conflict operating, and only some of them directly involved the mind, and lots of them took place only among members of the community. So in the first two here, these show dynamics of community groups protesting and how either the mine or the government is responding. And so in the first one, they're protesting and it ends up being repressed. And this just creates more frustration and results in future protests. But in the second, in number 3 and number 4, these end up taking place only within the community, and where there are divisions in the community concerning the mine. Are they in support? Are they against? And so it doesn't directly involve the mine, but there ends up being attacks within the community where those who are those who support the mine end up attacking people that have been outspoken. And as well in the fourth one, the presence of conflict in the community resulted in mistrust in the local government institutions, and just through their inability to respond effectively to the conflict. And in the final one, I was looking at it, how it impacts women and the gender dimensions of conflict. And each one of these involved different groups, different tactics, different motivations. And so it was interesting that when you unpack it, it ends up being a lot more layers, and there's a lot more going on. And so in a lot of the efforts and complaints submitted to grievance mechanisms, those were only issues associated with the first dynamic of conflict, meaning that there's so many other issues and groups and grievances that they were not being addressed in any form, any shape or form. So in terms of what can be done, ultimately it will depend on the particular context, but by using a complex systems approach, this helped me to identify some options that could work or could be explored in Guatemala, like keeping in mind that what the situation is in another country or context, like this might not be appropriate there. And so in Guatemala, keeping in mind that this had to do with inequality and exclusion, some options for engagement here include helping to build relationships, to empower the community rather than just providing benefits, establishing a common, meaningful, legitimate information base, and paying attention to inequalities. So to sum up, mining conflicts are not necessarily just about mining and may often involve a number of broader issues that make them challenging to address because they might go beyond the competence or responsibility of any one organization. They often involve many more organizations beyond just the company, community, government, which complicates efforts to respond to them. And finally, many of the tools, mechanisms, and forums for responding to their aspects of them cannot necessarily take on the full spectrum of issues or the conflict itself. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Aviva. You're certainly, it's great that I think your work is adding to your presentation. I mean, I was at your earlier one, and I think I appreciate the insights that you have in this. In terms of questions, I think we need to keep moving, but it occurs to me to also raise with everyone that we given that we're online, we have the opportunity to make use of the chat function a little bit. And I would encourage, and I'm going to look to see whether Karen looks aghast, but if people want to even add sort of questions into the chat, I don't want to make it a debate in the chat. I think that gets complicated, but to the extent people want to add questions, either there may be a chance for the presenters to sort of see those and bring them up in the breakouts or something, or also we are intending to create a record of this. And so even if it's questions in the chat, we can work to include those in sort of a record of the meeting, and I'll come back to what we might do next. So if you've got questions, even if we don't have time to get to them, feel free to put them in there. And with that, I will turn over to Anne-Marie. And I think, Karen, you're now going to put up Anne-Marie's slides, and Anne-Marie will speak to them.
Oui, oh, super. Bonsoir, bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. Saying bonsoir because I'm, could you go back? Do I have, yes, thank you. My name is Anne-Marie Leclerc. I'm a trade commissioner working on responsible business conduct within the Responsible Business Practices Division at Global Affairs Canada. I've been working on this file for the last 3 years, and Aviva, you're a very difficult act to follow. So I'll try to be as interesting as you were and as meaningful as you were. My role at present within the division is to provide training to our trade commissioners all over the world who work directly with companies on responsible business conduct. So what I will discuss very briefly here tonight, and I say tonight because I'm talking to you from Sweden, so it is nighttime. So sorry for the little c'est quoi le mot que je cherche? Time change. So I'm going to talk to you about Canada's approach to responsible business conduct, the role of the government of Canada in helping, supporting companies be more responsible. So to prevent issues and conflicts from arising, hopefully. Next slide, please. So what do we mean about responsible business conduct? A few years ago, the department and the government moved away from the concept of corporate social responsibility to align ourselves with what was used at the OECD, meaning responsible business conduct. Can you go back, please? Why? I have a, I didn't know I had animation in my slide. It's really okay. So I don't know if we can pause this so it doesn't mean. So what do we mean about responsible business conduct? It's companies that in all of their operation, how they do business, incorporate respect for human rights. That's really important. Respect local laws and Canadian laws, and as well abide by relevant international norms and guidance and guidelines, like the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, or the UN guiding principles for business and human rights. So it's how a company in its action within its own business operation incorporates economic, social, environmental, and governance expectations, how it acts responsibly on those fronts, and how it does due diligence and tries to reduce risks, therefore brings benefit to their own operations, their own bottom line, but at the same time to the communities they are involved in. Why we moved away a bit from CSR is because we felt it was a bit too much associated with philanthropic activities, benevolent activities that the companies would take on that fell outside of their regular operations. But responsible business conduct is more about integrating the management of risk within a company's own operation. including in their supply chains. Next slide, please. So the Government of Canada, working with companies, expects certain behavior. So companies active abroad, not just operating abroad, but also those companies that have involved in supply chains abroad, should reflect Canadian values, operate in a manner that is economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable, meet or exceed widely recognized international standards for IBC, and seek long-term success to deliver lasting local benefits. So these are what the government expects of Canadian companies in Canada and abroad. How do we do that? We articulate our approach within the strategy. The current strategy that we're still working with dates from 2014 and is presented here based on 4 pillars. I'm sorry about that. I didn't know I had animation in my presentation. This is so bad. And we are working at the moment to refresh, to renew this strategy. Some of you in the audience, I know, participated in the consultations. We thank you. We are working really hard to draft this new strategy. We hope it's going to be available very soon. And this is our current approach. I can tell you that the new approach will not be very different. The government will still be there to provide advice and guidance to companies on the ground, delivering the information that Aviva talked about to explain the local dynamics to the companies, to be there to accompany companies or clients on their understanding of the local conditions, the local dynamics, with the local government, with the communities, with the CSOs. So this role is still going to be there. We will still be there to build relationship, to foster that networking and that relationship, to establish those partnerships with the local government, to work with local academia, to work with the entire landscape and stakeholders of the responsible business conduct, to make sure that our clients understand the market, but also for us to better our knowledge and be able to provide the appropriate advice. We still have the dispute resolution mechanism. Canada has a balanced approach, so we work on preventing issues for arising by fostering those networks and partnership, providing guidance. But if issues do arise, we have 2 different dispute resolution mechanisms. The Canada's National Contact Point for Responsible Business Conduct that we established 20 years ago because we adhere to the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. This dispute resolution mechanism addresses a variety of issues, can look at activities of companies in Canada as well as abroad, and is responsive only. And the newest dispute resolution mechanism that we established a few years ago and that just became operational is the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise. Hello, Ms. Mayer-Offer, who's in the audience. Her mandate is to address issues, allegations of human rights abuse of companies operating abroad, so only on human rights, and in 3 sectors: garments and the extractive oil and gas mining. She can respond to requests for reviews, but she can also initiate investigations. So those are the 2 non-judicial accessible dispute resolution mechanisms that Canada's offer. But we also have all this government-to-government relationship where we try to develop a more predictable business environment for the companies by incorporating responsible business conduct within our free trade agreements. For example, the three most recent one, COSMA with the US and Mexico, CETA with Europe, and CTPPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, all include in the labor, the environment, and the institutional chapters provisions on responsible business conduct. So we engage bilaterally on those issues, so government-to-government discussions, and we also multilaterally at the UN, the WTO, APEC, the OECD, of course. Also, as Aviva said, it's a very complex environment, and responsible business conduct is not just about trade. It's also about, in the Government of Canada perspective, in the way we interact with the world, it's also about foreign diplomacy and, so sorry, I need to drink water. So it's not just about a trade priority, it also aligns with foreign affairs and international assistance, international development priorities. So we engage on that front. For example, when Aviva mentioned the inequalities, we also have development programming that's geared towards natural resources governance. So we engage with local government and provide development programming to help them build a better natural resources governance. And we work with human rights, like my colleague Michael will explain a bit later. Next slide. And yes, so the Trade Commissioner Service is there to help companies, to promote responsible business conduct, to share the information on the local market, so companies can include that information into their risk mitigation strategies. We offer tools, we offer resources, we offer training. It's on our Responsible Business website. And we also have a number of snapshots that were developed a few years ago. One especially on how companies can engage with human rights defenders. There's also one about stakeholder engagement, and another one that would be particularly interesting here in this context, the conflict-sensitive good business practices. All of these are available on our website. We also partner with other organizations like the Global Compact to develop tools and resources for our clients, for Canadian companies, Natural Resources Canada as well, develop guidance. All of these are available on our website. So that's all I had to say today. Happy to answer questions. And so this is the role basically of the government in all of this moving, ever-changing, ever-evolving landscape of responsible business conduct. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. And unfortunately, to keep us charging towards the breakouts, which I hope will give everybody interesting opportunity for discussion. I won't invite questions right now. I think people have put a few questions in the chat, and I will say while Michael is speaking, I'll throw in just a little bit of a statistic for everyone on kind of how many people we have participating from sort of different sectors, just so everyone has a bit of a picture of that. But while I'm doing that, I will turn over to Michael Mccullough to speak a little bit more specifically on the human rights side.
David, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Michael Mccullough. I'm with Global Affairs in our Human Rights and Indigenous Policy area. And basically our section, if you like, we manage international human rights negotiations, and we're a policy center for global affairs. And part of that is an important guidance document, an important policy that we developed called Voices at Risk. And we'll attach a link here in the chat. It's available in all 6 or will be available in all 6 UN languages. So we have it right now in English, in French, in Spanish, in Arabic, and then to come will be Russian and Chinese. Voices at Risk isn't something new. We've been doing this work for decades, but it really formalizes and takes the best of what we've learned over the last 50 to 100 years from our experiences working with civil society and clearly aligning ourselves to support human rights defenders. And so Ramneek Gruel, my colleague, and I, we sort of sat down a couple of days ago and said, when we look at what we've been doing around the world, are there 5 or 6 points that we could share with the group today that may be helpful in terms of the work that we do in this particular context that you're working in? And I think the first one is some of the settings that many of us work in are really difficult settings. They're not easy to find solutions. Extrajudicial executions, enforced disappearances, collapse of the rule of law, authoritarian states. They're really difficult ones. And the easy answer is to say there's nothing we can do. And I think the more complex but hopeful solutions are starting to look at what can we do in situations that are really difficult. And I think of a simple convening function that governments use all the time, whether it be working with activists, democracy activists in Hong Kong over the last few years, whether it be working with lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, just simply trying to live their lives in certain countries, whether it be in places where there's an explicit policy that extrajudicial executions are encouraged, if you like. One of the things that we can do and use all the time is simply convene. So we'll be working with a group of people, including governments, including businesses, including human rights defenders, always with their consent, to bring together groups to strategize, to brainstorm, to talk, to share information. And so I think one of our starting points is there's always something you can do in a situation that's really difficult. And that's really part of, I think, the second principle, if you like, is it's about being part of something bigger and working together. And I think of some of the activists recently who were detained in Egypt, who we were, the international community were able to get them out of prison. They've been imprisoned for political reasons and activities. If Canada's voice was acting alone, I don't think we would have been as successful as Canada and the US, and the UK and France and Germany and Australia and New Zealand and Japan and others were actually working together and calling on, in this case, a government for the release of these individuals. So to me, always being part of working with others, working with other companies, working with other governments, definitely working with civil society organizations when the issues are big and when the issues are complex. So issues around migration, issues around climate change, issues around gender equality. There's a long, long, long list. I don't think we can do it alone. And we're just much more effective when we're working together with others. Part of Voices at Risk is not simply responding to a crisis when somebody appears at the door of an embassy and says, my life is at risk, or I need to leave the country, or can I be accepted to Canada, or my family's being threatened. I think what we try and work with people, diplomats around the world, is to start early and don't wait for that crisis. And starting that early is about relationships, and it's about dialogue. And it's about getting to know the people in the area where you are working, in the area where you're living. It simply makes it so much easier. I just came back from a posting as the political director in Taipei, and we're working with migrant groups, we're working with human rights groups, the amnesties, if you like. We're working with groups trying to abolish the death penalty. We're working with Indigenous persons. And so those relationships are there, and they've been built up over 15 or 20 years, so that when something arises, there's an element of trust that's present. And so all of a sudden things don't deteriorate to the point of assumptions or misinformation. You're able to sit down and really have a good exchange and begin to look at what's complicated and what's kind of difficult to work through. So those relationships and dialogues we've used extensively in terms of being able to support human rights defenders. So sometimes when people are seeking political asylum from another country coming through Taiwan and being able to try and facilitate their welcome by Canada, we're able to work with a network of groups to help that, to help that occur, to verify who these people are, just really basic stuff, and then to get a sense of what the issues are and to be fully informed. So I can't, I think, emphasize just how important that relationship building is, even before we're talking about some of these difficult situations. And that's really part of creating, I think, a culture of rights. And all of us do that in many, many different ways. But a culture of rights is simply living in a society where the international human rights obligations that a state has signed on to are fully implemented. One that provides some measure of stability, some measure of safety. And I think Aviva was talking about the notion of empowerment or agency, where people are able to make decisions about the outcomes in their life. They're just much better places to be, and it's something I think that we all want. Human rights defenders tell us all the time, and sometimes our colleagues will call and say, I don't know what we can do. Is speaking out going to make a difference? Almost every single time, I've never heard a human rights defender say to me that they don't want the voice of the government of Canada speaking out on a particular issue. And I think you could probably extrapolate that to other organizations as well. I think the attention of the international community may be something that we undervalue. And that's what we do as diplomats. We try and bring the best of Canada, if you like, to the countries that we're working and living in. It's about the relationship between Canada and that country, but it's also about speaking out from the different human rights values that all governments in Canada at the federal level, provincial level, city level advance and sometimes take for granted. I find that that's really important. We'll do that by attending trials of human rights defenders, and we'll just be outside the court. And there'll be 10 lonely diplomats, but that's front page. And that's really paid attention to because it's a representative, it's one small representation that the international community is paying attention. So I think speaking out together, speaking out individually is a tool that we all have. And very often human rights defenders appreciate that and are looking to that. We do that through being present. We do it through the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We do it with statements from the Parliamentary Secretary, sometimes the Prime Minister, heads of missions, diplomats. That might be something that's germane or relevant. And I guess I'd just like to finish, because we're coming up on 1 o'clock, with the notion of safety and consent, especially in a digital era. A lot of our funding working with human rights defenders, or some of our funding, will go to organizations that can help them be more digitally secure, if you like, in states that monitor and intercept all communications. So we won't take any actions without the full consent of the person who has brought these concerns to us. Simply too important. It's not difficult to obtain, but it's just always having a good conversation about, how about we move forward in this direction, and really looking for that consent before doing that. So I'll wrap up on that, and we'll post a link to Voices at Risk, and looking forward to participating in the discussions to follow.
Thank you very much, Michael. And remarkably, we are just about on time. I think all of you guys have kind of packed in to a tight schedule a lot of thoughts and a lot of information. So we are going to go to the breakout rooms, and as I say, I think everyone received in advance, and I think the facilitators will take a moment when we get into the rooms to make sure everyone has had a chance to look at what I'm calling the case study. It's really just trying to do a little bit of a stage setting that I hope will give a chance for a conversation that brings out a lot of the points and the perspectives that our presenters have talked about. And I do look at this as this is progressing a conversation, I hope. So the breakouts aren't intended to reach a conclusion in anything particular, but I think it's to flesh it out, to see what we do align on and what are aspects that need to be explored more, what are some of the key questions that we would like to address. And so we'll take that. The facilitators will be taking a few notes so that we can do a little bit of a recap of the highlights when we reconvene. But clearly that's not going to be a complete record. I do again invite, I'm not sure we can capture the chat from the breakouts when we come back. So there won't be a record there. You can use that internally if you want to facilitate the breakout. But when we come back, we will do a little bit of a recap, but I'll also invite people to give some, if you want to add written comments or even email after, we do want to collect the thoughts that people have had from this. So with that, I will turn over to Karen, who's going to work the technical magic of Zoom, and we will all reappear in different groups.
All right, I'm just going to make one final adjustment because we have lost a couple people. But so what's going to happen if you have not participated in a breakout room before is that when I hit go, it's going to basically, your screen will maybe go blank for a minute and it'll send you into another space that will look like this, but with a smaller group of people. Each room has 6 to 7 people in it, and there will be a facilitator in each room. We'll have about 30 minutes, and then I'll give you a bit of a maybe 3-minute kind of warning and add a little bit more time. And then when I hit sort of close on the room, it will give you a 1-minute warning. So, but when the 1 minute's up, you automatically come back here. So you don't really have to worry about managing anything. The system takes care of it, but we'll go from here. So just gonna open the rooms. Bye.
Sorry, we lost you, Bill.
I always hate to have to pull everybody back like that, but it's got to happen sometimes.
We need somebody with time discipline. So that's do we have everybody back now?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, I hope everybody found it an interesting discussion. I will admit, I think I may have said that I might go around between the rooms. I got so absorbed in our discussion that I just stuck with it. So what I will do now is invite the facilitators to try and just in sort of 2 or 3 minutes give what you think of as being the highlights of some of the points that got raised. And I will invite, as I say, we may not have time to sort of let everybody weigh in on it, but please feel free to use the chat if you want to add any highlights as well. So maybe start with Amiel. Can I turn to you?
Absolutely, thanks. And first, let me thank all the participants in our room. I thought our conversation unfortunately got cut off just as it was starting to catch some fire. And I also want to acknowledge the presentations ahead of time really helped seed our conversations. So thank you to the 3 presenters. You did a great job in helping us succeed. I think without, and feel free to correct me, apologies, but I think where we really started to really work through something was talking a model of trying to find out some of the narratives. One model that was used was an interesting concept of, policy proposals couched to stories, where there's a villain who's caused a problem, the victim of that problem, and then potentially a hero to solve that problem. And so really trying to understand who's subscribed to that narrative, and are there ways that we can potentially build new narratives? Are there ways that those narratives can help change the inter and intra-community conflict? So how do you create a new shared story amongst all the groups? And sometimes that can be a company opportunity, as long as they can be seen to be an honest broker, and that they have the good relationships and the human relationships and the long-term relationships with the community. And sometimes they won't be seen that. They'll be seen as potentially taking somebody's side and not being seen as an honest broker. So navigating those hurdles can be quite difficult. I know I did not capture our full conversation, but in the interest of time, I think I'll leave it at that highlight.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll pre-warn you guys if Aviva, if I can turn to you, and then I'm thinking I'll turn to Jocelyn and then to Lindsay, so you guys you can be prepped. But sorry, so Aviva, I'm throwing it to you with no warning. But
so we spent a lot of time on some of the earlier questions, and then had like 60 seconds to start talking about what can we do. So we began with the issues, and we identified a number of different issues that might be relevant concerning the farming and the small and large scale mining, and a host of other issues that might be relevant to the local context. And associated with all of those, we identified a number of relevant actors or parties that might be involved in the conflict. And for me, something that stood out as really interesting was when we were brainstorming areas of clashes and areas of alignment. And the clashes mainly concerned in competing uses for environmental resources like land and water, and the distribution and access to benefits associated with mining, farming, however they're framing that. And a third one was concerning community cohesion. And what was interesting is that we also identified alignment on everyone could potentially agree that having a fair distribution of economic benefits, having good safety practices, environmental practices, and health were a good thing. Having local economic procurement, safety, having community empowerment, those were all good things. And so those were some potential opportunities. And we identified a number of potential ways where concerns might turn violent. And there was a lot of fruitful discussion associated with unintended consequences. And we were just starting to get into what we can do. And some of the things were focused on having a good grasp of the local context and having a baseline studies. And we were starting to unpack that. And I want to turn it over to some of my group members in case you've come up with any further ideas of areas for action and engagement since we got cut off. No? Okay.
I think you covered
thanks,
it, Aviva.
guys.
all right, well, and thank you, Aviva. And if I can turn to Jocelyn then to give,
Great, thanks, David. Like the other groups, we had a great conversation, and I think we always wish that we had more time. We started out by talking about the groups that might be at risk, and we identified a number. We observed that since there had been past practice in the area, that it would be important to do due diligence to really determine who had been involved in the past, who those actors were, and the relationship of those actors both to one another and to the government. So we want to really do a deep dive and look at some of those socioeconomic relationships and issues. We recognize that risk can be very differentiated, and that there are different vulnerabilities, and that often the most marginalized remain that way, and that can kind of exacerbate inequalities. So we want to be really conscious about that. We think that there are a number of groups that are often ignored, and this sort of links to my second point, but some of those groups are not always in the neighborhood or in the area. So we want to be sure that, you know, as the light gets shone on these groups, in some cases there will be illegal activity identified, and that can create risk for a number of the players. We want to make sure that women in the local communities where the impact may be disproportionate have a voice in some of the decisions. And we recognize that some of the communities in these situations may not have had national or even regional government attention in the past. And while that may be a good thing, it may also be unwelcome in some circumstances. So we wanted to be conscious of all of that. That led to our discussion about how can we create a safe and constructive and inclusive conversation. And so again, we recognized, as many of you probably did as well, how important it is to consider the dynamics of the situation, to really get to know the players and understand where the money is coming from. So that whole idea about following the money, we feel is quite important in terms of safe space. We also think that it's important to take a regional approach, that oftentimes we become very localized in our conversations, but there could be some transboundary or transborder issues or groups that need to be considered. We want to bring the critics into the conversation, potentially giving them a convening role, because we recognize that that in a way can help to build trust and build relationships. And then finally, we're conscious that a variety of conversations and different forms for engagement may yield different outcomes and may create differences of opinions among stakeholders, which could inadvertently exacerbate conflict. So we want to be very careful and to think about this. And we also suggest that the mining or exploration company needs to really recognize and acknowledge that they have a responsibility beyond their permit to engage with their communities, to build the relationships so that issues of conflict can be identified and discussed potentially before they become full-blown conflicts. So I hope we had such a rich conversation. I hope I've captured some of the key points from our group.
Yes, it's no small task to summarize 35 minutes in 2 or 3. But, thank you. And Lindsay, can I turn to you?
Yes. So I also just want to echo the same sentiment that, like, the speakers today were great. So thank you. And I really enjoyed talking with our group, and I apologize to everyone in my group when I kept trying to nudge the conversation on and kind of cut you off a little bit, but I think so I kind of took 4 really key things away of also a very rich conversation. But the first one that I thought was kind of really important was the fact to remember that we are always starting in the middle of something, and that there was a history there. We're not just coming in and starting fresh. And that would be the case if it was greenfield or brownfield, because there's already people living in the area. So I thought that that was important. And from that, we were discussing the idea of designs thinking, and to make sure to go slow and to plan ahead. That got into kind of designing communication strategy and designing processes that that include everyone. And I mean, through that, we got talking about some of the things that have already been said of who to include and how, and who might be forgotten and everything. And then just got into the general idea of make sure you really map your stakeholders, you're engaging with everyone, do your due diligence beforehand, take your time, have empathy, and observe. So I think that kind of sums up generally what we talked about.
Okay, thank you. And as I say, I will invite, if anyone wants to sort of add to the chat, if there are other kind of key points, feel free to do that. I also, Lindsay said I could offer both of us. We do want to create a record of this, and as I say, I would like to look at this as a progression of a conversation. So if people have any thoughts afterwards, and I'd ask for sort of brief summary thoughts, but feel free to email them to Lindsay or myself or both of us, and I'll kind of say we'll give it a week, and then we'll work to try and pull together the thoughts out of this. And one, I'll say, question I'll put, or we may just simply offer this to people anyway. We were thinking that actually once we produce that, it may be worth a follow-up discussion with at least those who are interested to sort of say, all right, if we synthesize this a bit, what is the progression of this conversation? Because I think what struck me in particular is the different perspectives that came in the different groups, and I think there are some good thoughts out of each, and it would be interesting to pull those together and perhaps continue a bit. So we'll explore that with this group. I'll say this is the license I have as the convener. One of the sort of ahas I had out of our discussion and then listening to the wrap up is a point was raised when we go into a community, and we come in, whoever comes in with a particular interest, whether it's an environmental group or a company or someone else, you tend to look for the people that that sort of align with your interest, and you can be aligning around what, and thank you to whoever was actually listening to what I said earlier and sort of raised, what is actually a divider issue, rather than that you are seen to be associated with someone who represents and I'm forgetting my own terminology, but an aligning issue. And so I think the question of, and so that my thinking, well, we should probably all be careful when we go into a community that we do meet with opponents, meet with whatever it is. If you're an environmentalist, go meet with the people that want to do mining, and so on and so forth. And I think that signals, to Michael's point early on about how do you sort of send subtle signals that things are okay, sends a signal that that's a legitimate point of view. What then occurred to me is, but that can harm your own introduction to the community, because if you are seen to be spending time with people who others see as opponents, you still risk getting aligned with the wrong issues. So I think that entry into the community and how you pursue a breadth of contact in a way that also leads to your own success in your relationship can be quite challenging. And with that, I think I have covered the points that I wanted to raise. We actually have 10 minutes left, so I might kind of open it back up if anyone has points they want to add. And if you could use the hand raising function, perhaps if I can ask Karen to watch that and open up, but we can take a couple of minutes. And maybe what I'll do is I'll cut it off quickly when we get to our time, but I'll say, as I said, just reiterate, we will produce some sort of output from this just to try and record this a little bit. And we will find a way to invite people into how to continue this discussion, and certainly let us know if you would like to be part of that, if you think there is something to continue on, or if you think there's an adjustment we should make, please let us know. So with that, Karen, do you want to moderate?
Yeah, I have Ian Thompson has his hand up, and then I see Jane is putting her physical hand up. So I'll start with Ian if you want to unmute yourself.
Just to touch back on something that I've mentioned before, and that is that underlying a whole lot of this is a reality that we are dealing with an inherently conflictive situation where there is often a competition between rights, a right granted to the company, a mineral right for the subsurface, and those people who are living, working, using the surface of the land, and in some cases owning the surface of the land, in many cases owning the surface of the land. And so there's an inherent conflict here of interests. And it's understanding that there are these competitions and that it is related to rights, I think is helpful and necessary, because it then takes us to the very necessary notion that the corporate interest has to be respectful of the rights and interests of those others. And if you are respectful, then there is the chance that you may be able to approach people in the right way and at least open a conversation that might become productive.
Thank you. Jane?
Well, I just wanted to raise, because just as we got cut off or brought back to the big group, and in our group had raised the idea of creating success metrics and the importance of that. And then I threw into the chat just the idea of creating those success metrics in a shared way collaboratively at the beginning of the process. Identifies, again, some of the shared interests that people have been talking about, but also can be used as guiding principles as you work through conflict. So I just wanted, we had just started that conversation and it got cut off. So I just wanted to bring it forward here.
Yeah, I actually really love that idea. And in addition to adding to that, the regional approach, not just thinking directly locally, because there are a lot of opportunities if you think more regionally as well, of what could be form of development as opposed to just what benefits the mine and those that are directly next to it. So anybody else have any thoughts?
I might just throw in, and if somebody wants to, you know, Ian, I think your point about competing rights, I think that's a really important aspect of this. But I'll sort of throw out, I think it's more than just the competition between sort of the rights of someone who has claimed mineral rights underneath and the rights of the people on the surface. But there are, I think, a lot of conflicting rights outside of that in terms of, you know, rights to preservation of culture versus rights to greater livelihoods. And I think we often see within communities, it's not sort of a single dynamic. And I think sort of Aviva raised this, it's not a single dynamic of the right of landowners versus the right of a mineral rights holder. It's different ambitions within the community that are each in a sense founded in rights. The right to income, the right to betterment versus the right to perhaps wanting to keep traditions. And I'm interested if anyone else has comments on that.
I think I'd agree with you. I fully agree with you there, David. But you know, having a rights-based approach to this, or at least, you know, recognizing that you are dealing with this portfolio of rights, which may be complementary but are often in competition with each other, I think that's helpful.
Marilyn, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, I think conversations, I can't stress how conversations are so important. And you don't know what you don't know. And, you know, I know I've had aha moments just sort of getting more involved. And sometimes we assume all our minds are biased, like regardless of we've been brought up certain ways. And so it's until you have sort of conversations. And I thought Lucia was talking about empathetic leadership. And I think all of this is talking about trust. Like, it's actually the nugget of human values is about trust. People will speak up and tell you if they trust you. And so these are issues of leadership as well. And I'll never forget where we all think, well, I shouldn't say put words in your mouth, my words, but that all roads in the north to develop big mines and the Ring of Fire area, like, we got to get roads up there, and everybody's pushing for roads. But some of the nations, you know, they don't want them. And that was surprised. Like, I went, what do you mean you don't want a road? You know, but then when you dig into that, you find out, well, they can control what comes through the airport, and they don't want booze and contraband and people walking out on ice, you know, and freezing. And yeah, it was so enlightening to me that, and so, like, it's about those conversations.
Linnell, see your hand.
Oh, friends.
Sorry.
Right?
Thanks, Marilyn. Yes.
Sorry, I can't find the raise your hand function. I'm going to do it. One of the things that Marilyn brought up, which I think is really important, and it doesn't matter the size of the organization, it's the access of leadership to leadership in these conversations. You don't, and with smaller companies, it only means that, the disconnect can be even further between some junior mining company who's got 3 or 4 people working in an office in an executive role or a directorship role in Canada who don't visit the site or haven't been. I know I've worked for companies where I've been the only person from the organization that was physically able to visit the site because it was too high there was too much elevation for the people who were the leaders of the company to go and talk with the leaders of the community. And I think, and that can be the same for somebody that's got a company that has 1,000 employees as opposed to one that has 20. But the ability of having the leadership of the proponent, but also the leadership of the host communities, eyes open by who they're dealing with, specifically and on a personal or on a visceral level, is very important. And I think it comes far too late in many of these potential conflicts. And it comes at a time where their reputation, especially the company's reputation, may have already been damaged. And that person those people are shouldering the responsibility of a damaged relationship without having been involved with it as they should have been at the very beginning. So I think, the leadership aspect is quite important. And the physical ability of leadership to meet leadership is very important.
Manal, I want to give you a chance. You have your hand up. You're muted.
It's that chief to chief level. So I like what you're saying there, Bill. I put my hand up because I was thinking about the rights. And one of the things that fascinates me about the human rights is that they all need to be happening all the time. So everything that the company does is kind of pushing against or up against some of those things. So it's always that tension between which human right is happening at the same, at the same time. And it was just the magnitude of getting it right can be really complicated. But as Marilyn was saying, if you were acting with integrity and you're acting with empathy and you're caring about the people and doing a good job, then I think that's really good conflict prevention, because then those human rights aren't in conflict when we're talking about human rights and surface rights and mineral rights. So just that balancing act. I really enjoyed the conversation today because of that.
Thanks.
And with that, I'm thinking we should have an ambition of just keeping this on time. But as I say, I want to find ways that and I know in 2019, we wrapped up an in-person session like this, and I said we would find ways to continue it. And then various things hit in the middle in the meantime, but I do want to keep this going. So we will stay in touch with this group and look for ways to continue the conversation. And so thank you all. And thank you very much, Karen, for sort of facilitating this through ESRS, and also for today actually facilitating the technology. And thank you everyone for attending, and very much to our speakers and facilitators.
I'll also take this opportunity to mention, and thank you all for participating and being very actively engaged here. We do have, even this month, a few more things happening before the conference in May. So there's been an ongoing conversation already started about developing relationships in tailings management. That the second session of a series of 3 will be on April 20th. And we have our stakeholder dialogue, which we have annually at the conference, will be held on April 27th. It's called Who Decides? You can find the registration links through the conference website. It is a separate registration from the conference, so you don't have to be attending the conference to participate. And there are just some various webinars happening as well, both on social and environment topics. So just keep an eye out for those. We're posting on social media, as well as our newsletter. That's we should have one coming out at the end of this week here. So.
All right, and I guess Karen, you don't have the power. You're going to make us all disappear.
Well, I can close the session if we're done. So that's yeah, I guess that's a wrap. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, David, for including us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.